And we're now in public session. I'd like to welcome the following witnesses: Mr. Jeff Rudd of United People and Mr. Damien Fagan, Ms. Catherine Green, Kildare and Wicklow Education and Training Board, and Drs. Ray Griffin and Tom Boland, both of Waterford Institute of Technology. You're all very welcome here this morning. In a few moments, I'll invite our guests to make their presentations to committee, and when they've concluded, I'll then afford members an opportunity to ask a number of questions. To those making the presentations, you've been informed of the time limits, and to members asking the questions on your first round of questions, you have 5 minutes, and if time allows, we can revert to additional questions. And I'd ask members and witnesses to stick to those time limits, please. Before asking witnesses, I need to draw your attention to the note on privilege. I wish to draw your attention to the fact that by virtue of Section 17(2)(l) of the Defamation Act 2009, witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect of their evidence to this committee. However, if you are directed by the committee to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter, and you continue to so do, you are entitled thereafter only to a qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and you are asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that where possible you should not criticise nor make charges against any person, persons or entity by name or in such a way as to make him, her or it identifiable. And members are reminded of the long-standing practice to the effect that they should not comment on, criticise or make charges against a person outside the House or an official, either by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. And before I be starting with Mr. Rudd and Mr. Fagan in a moment, before that, colleagues, both to the witnesses and to members, if you have mobile phones, will you either turn them off or to flight mode? They interfere not just with the meeting, but the recordings and the transmission of the proceedings. So if you have telephones, please do that. I'll start with Mr. Rudd or Mr. Fagan, or if you want to share the time between you, whatever way you want to do it. And I would remind witnesses that your opening statements have been circulated to colleagues.
I'm speaking on behalf of both of us here today.
That's perfect.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Jeff Rudd from Drogheda, County Louth. I am accompanied by Damien Fagan. We'd like to thank the committee for the invitation to speak here today and the public to have called for us to speak. For the past several years, we have conducted an investigation into JobPath. The vast majority of citizens that have sought of help comes from all levels of job skills and have worked for years, if not decades. You will find many examples of this in the victim statement report supplied. As outlined in our two separate submissions, due to the IMF and EU agreement, any state response to unemployment and long-term unemployment is restricted due to contractual terms, which won't be lifted until the full recovery of the funds and interest of Ireland's bailout programme. This currently amounts to €42,000 from every man, woman and child. Government and departments claim, quote, "The purpose of JobPath is an approach to unemployment activation which caters mainly for the people who are long-time unemployed, 12 months, to assist them in securing and sustaining full-time unemployment or self-employment." However, there is other agendas which the Department of Social Protection won't explain. They are to honour the IMF and EU agreement, to reduce long-term unemployed support costs for the Department of Social Protection, to reduce the cost and staff that is needed to support long-term unemployed in the receipt of payment from the Department. One should question which takes highest priority. As you will find in our written submissions, the full set-up of the JobPath programme is outlined. For example, Tuesday, the 11th of February 2014, Tours Nua, a joint venture between FRS, Recruitment and Working Links was set up. On Tuesday, the 28th of October 2014, CTEC Employment and Skills Ireland, designated activity company, was set up in Ireland. As this was happening, both CTEC Business Technology Centre Limited and one part of Tours Nua Working Links were under investigation by the UK Government Commons Public Accounts Committee for alleged claims that the companies were allegedly committing fraud and for the heavy use of sanctions, as revealed by 3 whistleblowers. Under previous Irish water legislation, people's personal data became legally classified as an asset. In 2017, the JobPath High Court case, the judge determined that the JobPath companies were not, by legislation, operating a public service. These 2 points are very important. A business that is not operating an official public function are not equally legally covered under the 2005 or 2010 Amended Social Welfare Act or accountable to the National Ombudsman. Therefore, the companies have no legal right in demanding people's private details. When the public try to regain their legal rights over their personal data, their legal asset, they are then accused of not engaging. They are trying to hold on to something they own, their personal data. However, others are demanding it, often with menaces. People are told that they have been randomly selected for JobPad. This is possibly wrong. The 2013 JobPad tender exposes citizens are silently targeted through a PEX stage assessment process. The state has put this on record, as you will see in the submitted United People 150-page JobPad report. It is at this stage of the JobPad programme that the data of the person is transferred to companies without the consent of the individual the data refers to. Under GDPR, the state has further, with JobPad, become a data processor, not just a storage keeper. The importance of this is also not explained to newly enrolled citizens. The advisor, a private company employee, begins asking questions about the person. The answers are to be saved to a server, again legally important, that help make up a PPP, Personal Progress Plan, known to some of you. Being more uninformed, the clients are now giving away a legal asset they own. This is a form of legal possession consent given away by a citizen deliberately kept in the dark. Speaking of the PPP, Personal Progress Plan, is defined in the 2013 JobPad tender document to page 137. It states this is a plan developed by the personal advisor with the client whose aim is to provide a clear route plan for the client to re-enter employment. In the same document, information that is required to develop a PPP can be found on page 33, section JobPad Services, section 322. The progression plan given by the private companies is a general power of attorney contract. Clients are not informed of this legal aspect either. A general power of attorney contract is defined by the Department's own publication in Guide to Self-Guiding Your Money Now and in the future, page 8, General Power of Attorney, which has been provided. The contractual terms for this General Power of Attorney PPP are the following. Failure to comply with the company's job search conditions and targets may lead to sanctions. Full access to all employment records from past and future employers of that person. Failure to be providing personal information regarding that person and close family, including financial situations, may lead to prosecution. These contractual terms are not defined or even a requirement of the creation of the PPP in the 2013 JobPad tender document. Excuse me a second. The greatest frustration people have about public services, privatisation-wise, for companies seeking personal profit, is that when such privatisation occurs, the effect of this is the needs of the people are overlooked and greatly ignored for the wants of the companies operating such services. There is a number of victim statements applied today that will bear this out. The two private companies, CTech and Tourist Neuro, are contracted to deliver JobPad based on their skills, abilities, experience and contracts. Since the beginning, both CTech and Tourist Neuro have further subcontracted the JobPad programme out to additional companies. CTech subcontracted to Personal Network, People First, and Tourist Neuro subcontracted to Working Links. All are in current operation today. There is a business practice by private companies that believes the use of sanctions on the public that uses public services to be the most effective method of savings. This practice was adopted from a previous UK model, the Irish Water Model and Incoming Waste Management Act. Please refer to the supplied PCS document. In this document outlines the JobPad protocols placed not only on the public but on the staff that are to enforce these protocols. In an additional request for tenders, RTF, document provided instructions are provided on how to get the application of sanctions applied to a person. Translated, this means the word of the companies is taken over the word of citizens that are referred for sanctions. The Oireachtas Research and Library Report 2015 highlights this problem. The Department has stated that in the designing of the JobPad programme, safeguards were put in place to prevent malpractices. We ask what safeguards. There are no safeguards to prevent the companies from enforcing unmeetable targets or meetings on the person to justify referral for sanctions. The worst part about having no safeguards is that when a referral for sanction is made, the Department does no investigation into the grounds for that referral. When a meeting is called, it is conducted in a disciplinary procedure manner and not a grievance manner to resolve. In the document, visual presentation on behalf of the public, we further expand upon this issue. Currently, the Appeals Office provides no safeguards against further sanctions being applied. Another safeguard that was meant to be in place has failed, as you will discover in Damien Fagan beside me's submission. Problems of the Social Act. One of the fundamental flaws is a created loophole that allows the Department of Social Protection to override the natural flow of justice as defined in our Constitution. This is outlined in detail within the documents provided by Damien and myself. This loophole in the Social Welfare Act allows the Department and companies to operate in a guilty until proven innocent system. The operation of a guilty until proven innocent system is unlawful, unconstitutional and breaks international law and a human rights treaty signed by Ireland. It is the belief of Irish citizens that a person is entitled to a fair hearing. The Social Welfare Act, in official interpretation and subsequent action, contradicts this. By signing a PPP, Personal Progress Plan, the private companies do profit €557 per signature. €60 million for just signatures alone has been paid out. No actual service has been provided yet to clients. Based on the Controller and Auditor's General Report, Chapter 12, 2017, between July 2015 and the end of December 2017, the Job Path programme costed €83.8 million, which breaks down to 50 million for PP signatures and 32 million in job sustainment fees. The 50 million for registration fees, which has then substantially increased, is made up of just one type of payment, which is received from the signing of a PPP and no services provided. This payment is only meant to be 10 to 15% of overall job path cost. The 32 million in job path sustainment fees is made up of 4 payments for the supports given to people in employment for 13, 26, 39 and 52 weeks. Translated, the Department has spent more money for companies doing nothing in a single payment than 4 separate payments combined for actual services they are meant to be providing for the people. Therefore, the argument has to be made on behalf of the Irish taxpayer. If it's costing €32.9 million to support a person into sustained employment, why are we spending over €50 million for nothing for signatures alone? The way the job path operation is being carried out, the indication is that substantial alleged fraudulent behaviour is occurring on a regular basis, in full knowledge and encouragement of the Department of Social Protection. The programme is meant to be for 30 hours per week of employment. The companies are only required to assist for 30 hours over 4 weeks. This allows the company to retain the citizen, still receive taxpayer payments, and the citizen can yet again be referred back to the programme. The submitted victim statements document provided today exposes a sample variety of victim statements regarding this. The usage of sanctions is a saving method. It is being used to repay Ireland's bailout programme. When the sanctions occur, the money is transferred back into central funding, where the Minister of Finance has already used central funding to lower Ireland's bank bailout costs. It is then fair to ask if the contractual terms of the bailout programme are not just terms to agree and honour, but also another taxpayer method of repayment on the debt. The Job Path companies contracted by the Department have been hiring referred clients for Job Path staff. For this, the companies receive all Job Path payments. As each company is required to burden the cost of their own staffing for the Job Path programme, by doing so allows additional bonus payments. This is a breach of the Job Path tender contract. Translated, they are gaining 2 separate taxpayer payments for each single staff position. This allows the companies to control the number of payments they receive for each single staff job. This issue is referred to in the United People Job Path 2019 report. Another issue is that the unemployed are sent out a letter stating they are invited to attend Job Path, while at the bottom of the letter the real message is "turn up or else you will financially suffer." Translated, allegedly press-ganged by the state, by state financial threat. Many victim statements provided by myself bears this out. At the initial meeting, they are instructed to sign the PPP. They are not told at any point that they have the legal right to decline signing a PPP, a private contract. There are 2 main criminal offences committed by the Job Path companies that occurs when a person receives a legal right not to enter a private contract. When a person is forced into a private contract under any form of threat, sanctions, this is a criminal offence by the letter of the law itself. See the Non-Fatal Against the Person Act 1997. When the person is coerced and then sanctioned, this again is a criminal offence by the letter of the law itself, Criminal Justice, Theft and Fraud Offences Act 2001. This has been proven to the court's satisfaction in Damien Fagan's case in High Court, which I later assisted. Today we speak for many who don't have a voice, who have been a target of alleged bullying, coercion, intimidation, financial starvation and more by the Department of Social Protection on the rash say of companies. Case in point, Jerry Tobin. Please see the supplied United People report. Additionally, invites are told to apply for jobs, any jobs. In many cases, it doesn't matter if they are suited for them or not. They are ordered to apply. If they don't, more threats via the private companies are issued. State services and those they hire are supposed to work with the citizens around their day-to-day requirements, including family schedules and health conditions. In job path reality, the opposite occurs. Too many times, people have been sanctioned or cut off for having the cheek to go to a hospital or drop their kids at a school first. They subsequently have been unable to make very poor assigned appointment times. Conclusion. As job path has continued, hundreds of people, possibly thousands, have found themselves being allegedly abused, shouted at, kids shouted at, made to feel inadequate, treated as if they were second-class citizens to kick about. They have been treated harmfully, alleged assaults, sexual harassment, their personal data abused, illegally deprived of money that has left them hungry, maybe homeless, at the mercy of others and more. You will find documented examples of all this in what I have supplied in documentation today. In some cases, people have tried to kill themselves on job path property. They have cracked from physical and mental abuse they have allegedly gained, in the end, so that the two companies and their additional fronts can massively private profit. This is a simple scratch of the job path surface. If you delve deeper, you will find far more shocking issues. This is nothing less than ongoing mass state-sanctioned abuse. In conclusion, why is speaking up about the job path important and investigating should be done? The state is knowingly and unknowingly, openly and covertly, allegedly abusing current human rights, law-breaking at a national and international level, while further undermining the present and future rights of all, employed and unemployed, carers, parents, single individuals and more. Additionally, the job path exposes an inherent flaws in our current departmental systems that allows this to happen. Again, in reality, the private businesses are further profiting, while a nation of citizens losing quality of life, rights to self-determination, etc. We have spoken to victims of job path from all walks of life. We have heard their pain, seen their distress and financial hardships due to job path. Many have had mental breakdowns. Some have ended up spiralling into depression, which has resulted in drug taking of both legal and illegal kind. See victim statements supplied on this. As they have explained their current situation, they have cried. And I'm being brutally honest here, I have cried with them. Job path encroaches upon the rights of every citizen in Ireland. We say this without any shadow of a doubt. Job path, in the vast majority, is not a benefit to citizens. It is, however, a future inquiry into making right now and a drain of taxpayers' money. For the last few years, as our investigation continues, our families have had the patience of saints while this has gone on, but all completely understand why we persist in helping many citizens wronged. It is the duty of every citizen in Ireland not only to hold elected accountable, but also hold the departments and programmes which they oversee. How can we not do anything less? Thank you for allowing ourselves to come here to speak today. We look forward to any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Mr Rudd, for your opening statement. We'll now move to the presentation from Ms Green, please.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for the invitation here today to contribute to this very valuable discussion that you're having in my role as Chair of the Adult Guidance Association. Just to say to you, I work in the Kildare and Wicklow Education and Training Board as a coordinator of guidance, and I deliver guidance in the Bray area, but I also coordinate the service across the whole of Wicklow. But today I'm representing the 37 services working across the 16 ETBs in our service, and I'm here to promote, I suppose, and advocate on our behalf, as we see ourselves and did see ourselves before Job Path came along as the organisation that should have been doing the job that Job Path is now doing. Okay, so to just give you some background to our service, the AGES, the Adult Education Guidance Services, were established in 2000 in response to the Department of Education White Paper Learning for Life. Adult guidance was recognised in the White Paper as the linchpin in the lifelong learning model, enabling adults to make educational work and life transitions in a fast-moving, technologically based globalised society. The guidance counsellors in the Adult Education Guidance Service have been and continue to be professionally qualified to postgraduate level in guidance, as set out in the DES Course Recognition Framework document dated 2016. The AGES, the Adult Guidance Services, provide a full-time, year-round, objective, professional, quality-assured guidance and information service. The service provides guidance to adults at the pre-entry, entry, ongoing, pre-exit and follow-up stage for those engaged in adult education and training. The service is underpinned by the following principles: learner client-centred, confidentiality, impartiality, equal opportunities, accessibility, transparency and empowerment. And that comes directly from the white paper Learning for Life 2000, which was where we were instigated and got our legal framework. That legal framework was continued through EU and national guidelines. The Aegis model is informed by these. EU policy identifies lifelong guidance as core to a successful, dynamic, knowledge-based economy, viewing it as an effective conduit between education and sustainable employment while promoting social inclusion. That's from the Lisbon Agenda, but also it's written into our National Skills Strategy 2025, which I will mention again. So we then, in the Solis FET strategy, became really excited when the Solis FET strategy was launched in 2014. The adult guidance services were recognised by Solis and the Department of Education and Skills as the model for delivery of educational and career guidance to adults in Ireland. That's in section 10. The rollout of the Solis FET strategy underlines both the need for, this is a direct quote, both the need for guidance and the centrality of guidance in government's job strategy. The Further Education Training Strategy recognises that the planning process must consider and identify how the needs of the learner, the employer and the community are met, and how effective guidance services can ensure a return on the taxpayer's investment. And I know that you're here looking at that issue as well. You know, quality of service for the money. As stated in the Solis FET strategy, the adult guidance service enables individuals and therefore communities to achieve their developmental, personal, social, career and employment aspirations. Guidance facilitates the acquisition of career management skills and benefits employees throughout their working life. So our adult guidance services provide professional, impartial and confidential service to all those who are over 16 and out of school to post-retirement age. We work closely with our second-level colleagues. I will not take a student who is in second level who has a guidance counsellor, but if they are out of school, which unfortunately some do drop out, transition year and so on, we do get those. We will recommend them to Youth Reach or to the advocate there, but we sometimes have them in part-time programmes for adults, which isn't always suitable, but we will work with them to ensure that we can get them back into education. Through our referral protocol with the DESP, which we have since 2012, and our links with the local, state and voluntary agencies like local community mental health agencies, enterprise partnerships, enterprise boards, the regional skills fora, the Money Advice Bureau, Citizens Information Centre and all social inclusion programmes. We meet with over 52,000 clients on an annual basis, supporting them across education, training and employment. We can evidence the work through our national client database. This database indicates the outcomes, including the acquisition of new skills, increased certification and progression in career development, all of which enhances the likelihood of long-term unemployed individuals eventually performing more highly skilled jobs in the workplace. And that is detailed now in the NCG Adult Guidance report every year, our stats. Our stats were, in the time before the moratorium, before austerity measures, we were meeting over 68,000 people because we had a full staffing. We were deeply affected during the time of the moratorium, and the problem was that JobPath in this new guise was rolled out when had we been invested in at that time. We really believe that the employment statistics would be so much better if we had been employed then. So effective guidance services help ensure a return to the taxpayer from the use of public funds. And this was done with a strategic review of further education and training by Professor John Sweeney when he was analysing our service in relation to being the one that should have been linked to the FET strategy and our service being rolled out. The Adult Guidance Association supports the development of an integrated further education and training guidance service as envisaged in the Solis FET strategy, building on the practice currently in operation in our service. At present, because of the lack of a coherent, joined-up approach, re-guidance, there is a fragmentation in the way guidance services are being delivered, which is wasteful to the taxpayer. In our recent submission, which was in June, to the Department of Education and Skills Indicon Career Guidance Review, we recommended that an interdepartmental framework for adult guidance is required. An overarching body should be established representing all stakeholders in guidance, the Department of Education and Skills, the DESP, ETBI, Education Training Board Ireland, IBEC. I forget to put in IBEC, but we have met with IBEC, and IBEC are fantastic. We accepted a lot of what was in their report that they got out this September, Smart World for Career Guidance. The SOLIS, the Department of Business, Enterprise and Innovation, and all of these other organisations, NCG, we all should be, and that I understand is agreed in the Indicon report, which hasn't been published. And if you have any influence at all, please get it published for us, because it was done in June, it was to be out in September. Minister McHugh has a lot on his plate, I know, when he came in with the school issue, but we really want to see that review, because we think it can change the way things are being done in relation to this model. So I want to compare our service with the JobPath model. The JobPath model was based on the model being used by G4S Recruitment Company in the UK, which was criticised by Ofsted. It was poor practice to lift this model and some of its workforce from the UK into Ireland without making any changes or adaptations for working with the Irish public. We have no difficulty with recruitment agencies as a model of accessing employment, but to use these services, people must be highly skilled and workplace ready. Now, I hate this phrase, but I'm going to use it because that's what is used by the Department. Probability of exit from the live register, PEX 1. PEX 1 people can use a recruitment agency. Yourselves or myself, if we were made redundant tomorrow and got going immediately, or actually before we knew we were being redundant is even more important, we would probably be able to use a recruitment agency and get into a job. But within 3 months, even of the most highly skilled person, and I have met top bankers with top qualifications, everybody, we met everybody between 2011 and 2015, before JobPath got rolled out in the way it is, every unemployed man and woman in my community, and right across the country we met them. And after 3 months of trying to get a job, even if you'd had a highly paid job in any of Accenture, any of the big businesses I can mention, I can't even think, public agencies, people after 3 months become very low. The rejection list, if you keep getting rejections into your inbox, into your postbox, you go flat, and I have seen it so many times. So I have to say that to you, that the recruitment style model is not a guidance model, and it can work for a very well educated, ready for work person, and we use them for those people. My own son works he's one of those emigrants to Australia, working very successfully in recruitment, so nothing against it. You have the statistics yourself on the effect of the JobPath programme better than I have. So in terms of personal client testimony, to be referred to Thurles is to be placed, I use Thurles because that's who I work with, but obviously CTEC, is to be placed in a very vulnerable position and denied access to further education and training. There appears to have been a lack of recognition by Thurles and CTEC of the trauma for people being at a major crossroads in their lives, in addition to a lack of understanding of their need to manage challenging barriers in terms of childcare, transport, disability, illness, bereavement, addiction issues and mental health issues, post-redundancy and financial stress. The forced march pattern of this recruitment model has been unsuccessful, with only 9% of participants securing longer-term employment. And that's just for 1 year, and many of them have dropped out, my clients, at the end of a year. So I'm going to just direct you to the example I gave, and just very quickly I will just say one example of inappropriate Thurles work was when a DSP case officer made a referral to my service. A 62-year-old man who had left school aged 10 and had been out of work for 20 years was receiving job seekers allowance after exiting another service. He was experiencing anxiety. His only outing was to walk to his mother's grave in darkness. His basic skills led me to recommend a part-time literacy, communications, computers and woodworking workshop in our local adult education centre. He agreed to engage with the programme, and I put counselling skills in place for him and other supports to deal with his anxiety issues. After 6 weeks into the programme, he was called by Thurles and removed from this education programme. And 2 weeks later, he came to me in an extremely, and I can just remember it so clear, agitated state, asking me to make a CV, as he had been ordered to return to Thurles by the end of the week with evidence of 15 job applications submitted. In this 3-week period while he was engaging with Thurles 3 different Thurles advisors had contacted me for a copy of his CV, and one of them said, "Dear lady, please send CV to me of, and the name of the person spelled wrongly. And that is, some of the people who were hired in this organisation were unskilled to deal with the level of person that they were dealing with, which was very difficult. Our client did a full year with Thuras Nua without getting any work. And we have recently learned that he has been returned to Thuras Nua and he will be with them until September 2019. At present, he is not engaged in any education or training or employment, but is required to attend on a monthly basis, where he has a chat with a very nice gentleman now. And we are experiencing now that I have a better relationship with the people in Thuras Nua because I'm putting them onto our programmes. But we've got a double work to do. I have to get in touch with them. I have to get in touch with the DSP. I have to get it sent. It takes about 6 to 8 weeks then. They've already lost maybe 3 months being with Thuras Nua. So it's a doubling up of and waste of time and bureaucratic time. So our own case study, you see that this is a case study that is in the NCG database. And I won't go through it, but I think you can see that the way that we, the model that we are working, was very, very successful. So, following on from the Thuras, it is clear that the approach taken by Thuras Nua, one-size-fits-all model, does not deal with the individual circumstances and displays no long-term strategy towards career development, confidence building and educational qualifications, without which there is very limited access to sustainable employment. One professional approach over a period of time leads to better outcomes. In our experience, and particularly for those with very basic skills, the minimum term required to gain new skills is 1 to 2 years, attending a further education and training, QQI level 3 to 5 qualification, or accessing a traineeship, which are great now, the new traineeships, or apprenticeship. Longer time would be required if they want to obviously gain a degree or a higher level of education. Once in employment, people can continue their education through part-time options like springboard evening training courses and job training where provided. One would question how the job paths approach outcomes can be validated. Also, it is difficult to understand how the approach blends into the National Skills Strategy with its narrow employment-only focused objective. It does not align with the broader needs of upskilling and social inclusion and the goals of Ireland's National Skills Strategy 2025 for people across Ireland. As stated in the Ireland National Skills Strategy, page 17, to support the achievement of the National Skills Strategy Vision 2025, the government objectives are education and training providers will place a stronger focus on providing skills development opportunities that are relevant to the needs of learners, society and the economy. The quality of teaching and learning at all stages of education and training will be continually enhanced and evaluated. There will be active inclusion to support participation in education and training in the labour market. And the example that I gave you from our model of the Integrated Information Officer, myself as the guidance, and our CV and interview skills service, which is second to none, got that woman who was made redundant, lost in confidence, out of work, back into a job. She's working extremely happily in administration. And recently in my office, I got an opportunity. We're working very closely with employers now to give another. An employer was looking to employ somebody with good administration and communication skills. I rang 4 of our past clients in the last 3 months, and 3 of them, based on our CV and interview skills work, because they were ready for work, people that I was looking at, had already got positions. One in a very good company, Accenture, another one in an Irish university, and a third one in a local, very good company in my own community in Bray. So they are the stats that and we can evidence this in our database. Since establishment in 2000, the adult guidance says where the service charged to work with those who are unemployed and marginalised so that they can avail of education and access opportunities in order to obtain sustainable employment and facilitate social cohesion. This objective was further developed in 2012 by the referral protocol from intro-case offices, and I want to say that we have a fantastic relationship with our DESP case officers, who they themselves, I don't think they could say it, would really do anything anything to avoid the person having to go back to a Thurles-New or CTEC situation, because they want them to get their opportunity for education, and we work extremely well with them when they come to us in the initial phase. Furthermore, we note the recent debate about the service delivery model of JobPath, which has been awarded a budget of €140 million since 2015. Only 9% of participants have progressed into full-time employment, and I believe the figure is wrong here, that I have 11,000, but John will correct me on that, who previously used Thurles are returning for a second year, like my client, of participation. By comparison, in that same period, the 4 years between 2015 and 2018, the guidance service have met with and progressed more than 208,000 beneficiaries on an annual budget of just £6.5 million, with a cost to the state of £125 per beneficiary. And we, I can tell you, in our services are not looking for more money for ourselves or anything like that, but we want you to support the increase in our service and the rollout of us to be the service to replace the JobPath model, which we were chosen to be in the Solas FET strategy, the government's own strategy. So furthermore, it is crucial to mention that we provide a service to all unemployed individuals, including those not entitled to social welfare payment, low-skilled employed, those on zero-hour contracts, underemployed, which can be very high-skilled people, unfortunately, who are now underemployed, those facing redundancy, early school leavers, and those who have left college without securing employment. One other issue that the Adult Guidance Service would like to raise is the demand for progression for clients accessing education and training by the Department of Social Welfare. This can be counterproductive when jobs are changing so rapidly and their qualifications are outdated. So any of us in this room, leaving work tomorrow, being made redundant, I know myself, my IT skills would have to be majorly updated, and I would be afraid to go for a job that I would have a lot of other qualifications for, but that would be my weakness. And I'm sure in this room, any of you leaving here today, you need the opportunity. So sometimes that could be a level 6 that you require in supervisory management, but you wouldn't be allowed to do that by the DSP because you have to progress. I'm going further. I will move on. I suppose one key thing I wanted to say is that I think that this project, JobPath, is displacement of public services, and also it's a duplication, and therefore I bring back the thing to the value for money exercise. We do believe that we are the exercise. We are hopeful we are the service to deliver it. A key component of our work is helping those who are long-term unemployed. As highlighted by Cambridge Professor Tony Watts, the career guidance counselling process is not only focused on finding people jobs, but supporting people to become resilient and to construct their own career journey. We are hopeful that the guidance review will soon be published and will ensure that a national lifelong career guidance strategy will be rolled out to ensure a coherent career guidance provision is provided for all individuals at all life stages across Ireland. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Ms Green. Just to say, I know you didn't get to complete the statement, but the statement in full has been circulated, your opening statement, to all of the members, and I want to afford them an opportunity for questions.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
And our final presentations are from, is it Dr Griffin, Dr Boland, or both of you? Whatever way you want.
Okay. So, Chairperson, committee members, thank you for the invitation to present our research to the committee's discussion on JobsPath. We're joined today by Dr Aisling Tuitt, an Irish Research Council postdoc researcher on the Waterford Unemployment Research Collaborative Project at WIT. Since 2012, we've interviewed 121 unemployed individuals in an aspiration to capture the experience of unemployment. Gathered over 7 years, our work captures the considerable transformation of welfare services under the Pathways to Work initiative. Since 2014, in our data, we clearly see a significant shift towards a less supportive, more conditional, less empathetic, more pressurising welfare system, where the threat of sanctions are ever present. The individuals subject to this are forced to perform as directed by case officers in intro and job path providers, often against their better judgment and usually without a positive outcome for themselves. Since 2016, many job seekers distinguish between their experience in intro offices and their referral to JobPath as a very distinct intensification of pressure upon them. They moved from a bureaucratic system, which can be unsympathetic and is often given to autocratic direction and demands, to one that actively and capriciously patronises, cajoles, threatens, manipulates and at times bullies them. Many identified this service as the state deliberately attempting to lower their expectations of work. First in terms of their reservation wage, but also interfering in their family and caring responsibilities. Long-term concerns for career development and life balance were notably absent from job path providers' concerns. While they may be intended to support re-entry to work, many aspects of welfare services on the various schemes compound the already negative experience of unemployment. In our research, we encountered 25 individuals who report direct personal experience with job path, largely tourist nua. We did not seek out positive or negative experiences, rather than just authentic accounts of the contemporary experience of unemployment. And we encounter reflections on the service that are very different from those in the evaluations of the department and job path providers. All our interviewees, all 25, recalled being forced to undertake futile bureaucratic routines, such as mandated and monitored job search activity. For example, they were watched over while sitting at a computer for a number of hours while they did internet searches for jobs. They had their CV rewritten for them or massaged in order to orientate them towards existing job interviews, without reference to long-term career development, personal circumstances or responsibilities. We got reports from all people we spoke to of being forced to undertake coaching, personal effectiveness and confidence training, which interviewees reported was delivered largely by unqualified and inexperienced trainers and actually served to undermine their confidence and sense of self-worth. They were asked over and over again for proof of job search under suspicion of duplicity. They felt intimidated over technical and minor infractions of the Byzantine rules in these schemes, and they were often required to accept employment that individuals considered incompatible with their personal career ambitions or their family responsibilities. Specifically, and we provide more detailed case in our submission of these, we encountered one woman who was sanctioned and ended up relying on a food bank and high interest debt. We encountered a traveller who, despite a decade of whole-time schooling, left the schooling system with very low levels of literacy and was enrolled in training, mandated training, that required very high levels of literacy, and he had his name amended against his wishes on his CV to conceal his ethnicity in job search. We encountered an aspiring architect whose carefully husbanded career ambitions, she found her job search was micromanaged in a way that undermined that carefully laid plan of developing a reputation with local employers, and then was directed to reduce her expectations and accept other types of work. We also encountered a pregnant woman who was directed, under threat of sanction, to accept work at a call centre in a location some distance away, which she had absolutely no means of getting to. There was no public transport, and she was advised to make friends with people or car share or carpool or something. We should emphasise that all respondents detailed a continual threat of sanctions, which made engagement and compliance with the various tasks they were encouraged to undertake appear compulsory. Thus, our data demonstrates that beyond the actual application of sanctions, that the process of activation under threat of sanction is in and of itself a negative experience. The process is a punishment. Our qualitative data is commensurate with international experiences. So while comparing the percentage of individuals sanctioned against international benchmarks, Jobs Path is not a harsh sanctioning regime, but we know the ever-present threat of sanctions has negative long-term consequences for individuals' well-being and future earnings. While officially sanctioning decisions are made by the intro office, in practice and in the experience of job seekers, the recommendation of a sanction by a Job Path provider appears to be a fait accompli. In other prior research, where we've spoken to counter staff and case officers and welfare offices, the job path providers are described as deciding sanctions, and the intro simply implements them. We did not encounter any positive experience that we could report to the committee today in our interview data. My colleague Tom Boland will detail our policy evaluation of job path.
So, our interview's experience of job path is that it's a scheme that actively undermines their personal reservation wage and their labour market expectations, so that they'll accept any job, however unsustainable, unsuitable and precarious. It's inspired by behavioural economics and the idea of subtle nudges. Job path assumes that the problem of unemployment is idleness and that a work-first approach will ultimately lead to sustainable, high-quality employment. In practice, these measures constituted a stressful and unwelcome intervention in people's lives, even described as traumatic in some cases. All of these interventions are made under the threat of sanction for non-compliance, and this pressurises job seekers to accept any work, which may explain why there's 25% commence work, but only 9% are still in employment after 52 weeks, the same as if they had not gone through the process. International research has begun to reevaluate these clichés that any job is better than none and that work is always the quickest route out of poverty. It's not the case. Many of the job path interventions were already emerging under intro and were part of the traditional local employment service supports the unemployed. What is distinctive here is that they've intensified and become more aggressive and more punitive under job path. This is due to the pay-by-results model or the recruitment of staff on short-term contracts without necessarily having professional careers in the welfare system as per guidance supplied by the Educational Training Board. Given what job path aspires to do, this contract has an unfeasibly short time horizon, which does not facilitate the building of durable institutional resources on the awardee's part. If Ireland really has perpetual need for the complex and contextual pastoral skills for nurturing discouraged job seekers back into the labour market, it takes time to build such capacity, and if done correctly, it could be valuable. However, a 4-year contract is an unsuitable instrument for this activity. I want to talk about creaming and dumping, so-called. Our interviews mostly reported being acutely aware from their experience of job path of the so-called payments by results model that drives the initiative, and so they all had a realistic understanding of their own personal labour market. They actively encouraged and supported their job path caseworker in creaming and dumping, whichever, and they tended to grow frustrated, really, when they're asked to do things that they perceived to be harmful to their career prospects or their responsibilities. In fact, they tried to negotiate the creaming and dumping that they knew to be going on. It's also worth noticing at this point that there's a huge inconsistency in the geographical distribution of sanctions. It does not correspond to the level of the population of the unemployed. It ranges from about an 8% sanction rate in Louth or Limerick to almost nil in Mayo. And this inexplicable variation is consistent with our long-held research, which suggests that there is a significant variation in how rules and eligibility are applied and interpreted office by office, day by day, welfare officer by welfare officer. This sort of thicket of schemes, their constant reform, their adjustment, their modification, make the rights of a service user unclear and contingent to both users and frontline staff. In conclusion, activation in the form of human capital building and supported job search can have long-term positive effects on the supply side of the labour market. We suggest that investing in training and the Back to Education scheme are the best tools for doing this. Policies which emphasise welfare conditionality and sanctions are short-sighted. They require compliance under threat of being put below the minimum level of income, and this mainly has negative consequences. There is significant international research on the consequences of sanctioning, from short-term poverty to long-term health and well-being problems and negative future effects on earnings and employment. The knock-on effects on the economy are to foster precarious, low-wage, no-wage cycles and alienate those who are most disadvantaged and to unfairly pressurise those who are temporarily out of work. Rather than using both sticks and carrots, we suggest removing the threat of sanctions as a core administrative tool, because the benefits of an education opportunity or a job, these should be sufficient motivation in themselves. Sanctions may have some part to play in the benefit system, but their current role is out of all proportion and against the principles of natural justice. Clearly, sanctions should be subject to stronger regulation and oversight, and we've recommended more specific measures elsewhere in our previous research and submissions. Regarding JobPath, the payment by results and short-term orientation of the JobPath contract are unsuitable policy instruments. The power which providers wield over the unemployed is neither appropriate nor commensurate with the vulnerability of this population. The work-first approach involves market coaxing, which basically involves reducing job seekers' choices and expectations. It reduces public faith in the social safety net, and it undermines the entire labour market. The impact of JobPath on individual lives is decidedly negative, even when sanctions were not imposed. We envisage a long-term impact on overall social cohesion for these policies as a result of the experience and throughput of so many citizens through these initiatives. We suggest that the committee should advise strongly against renewing JobPath and that we need to learn the lessons of this expensive, caustic at the point of use and broadly ineffective misadventure, because we must seek to build a high-quality labour market welfare policy. Thank you very much.
Dr. Griffin, Dr. Boland, thank you very much for your presentations. Dr. Griffin and Boland, I just want to ask you one general question before I hand it over to the committee. I'm had my glasses off, so I'm not reading the figures, but the point I want to get to is, I think you said since 2012 your research involved interviews with 121 unemployed people. You went on to say that 25 subsequently had experience or contact with JobPath. And the question I really want to pose is more, I suppose, from the point of view of the research. How valid is it then to, I suppose, draw on that to a national programme where there were thousands of people involved? In other words, what I'm trying to ask is the sample pool of 25 appropriate to make broader findings? And is the sample pool, I suppose, representative in terms of age, in terms of gender, in terms of geographic location? That is not a criticism on your research. It's for us as a committee to understand that profile, that you have 25 people, you had very detailed experiences with them, but in terms of their age, their profile, their gender, their education, their geographic location, how do you try and draw that out into, I suppose, making comments and recommendations on a national programme? That is not a criticism, but it would help the committee, and then I'll hand over.
We appreciate that there's different strengths to quantitative, statistical and qualitative work, and that there's certain challenges in that. The first thing we have to say is that not all of the people we speak to are even aware that they're dealing with JobPath or Toras Nua. They don't always distinguish between the intro and Toras Nua. Secondly, we are ongoing research, so we have a PhD worker who's a researcher who's currently doing this, and we have specific built-in gender, age, rural, urban weightings as per the current composition of the research.
Maybe just to say, we don't think there is a coherent experience of unemployment in Ireland. One unemployed person to another person is a radically different person with their own life course. And there's no coherent system for administering unemployment in the social welfare offices. So if you look at, for example, at the sanctioning rate in Wexford, it's 8%. If you look at the sanctioning rate in Waterford, it's close to 1%. So even in very narrow geographic spaces, you find a huge experience. It incorporates people who are very vulnerable lives, people who've had very difficult lives, and people who are transitioning from one job to another. So the way we administer unemployment is called unemployment, but actually the experience of it is like, and just to clarify, our 121 interviews is since 2012. Mm-hmm. So we typically do a tranche every second year of people, and the 25 we encountered, they're people who specifically reference, just naturalistically as we interview them, JobPath and relay their experience. So it's a random sample, but what's very interesting is that each one has consistently reported this negative experience. The data set from 2012 to 2015, there was a much wilder accounts of the experience of unemployment. Since then, it's become more consistent, and instead of looking to themselves as not getting a job for personal reasons, they now narrate their experience of unemployment as being a negative experience that is being administered to them by the state.
Thank you very much. Senator Higgins, are you still under pressure for time?
I am under pressure for time.
Colleagues are happy we'll let Senator Higgins go first.
Apologies, I'll have to ask the questions and then
you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much for all of the testimonials and all of the analysis. I think it's been really, really useful, and it reflects indeed many of the issues, and not just around job path, but in terms of our wider report which the committee produced in respect of unemployment. One which I think was very important was the question of the appropriateness of placing, and this has been a huge issue in terms of the quality of casework, in terms of the linking to a work-first approach versus an education, training or route forward. And I'd just like, in a minute, if you might elaborate a little bit around that, because what we found, even from those who had produced initial reports that talked about work first, or the different outcomes sometimes get quoted, that education hadn't led to immediate employment options, but what we did find is that it does lead to better prospects down the line. And sometimes where training is seen as not giving the right options, it's because it's not appropriate training. So I thought it was really interesting. I think if you could just discuss the work first issue more, because I think what I found extremely interesting, for example, was the description of how in some cases this has damaged people's employment prospects and their career, especially, for example, as was described, I think, in one of the examples, if you're in a small town and there is a limited number of employers, if you're forced to look for inappropriate jobs, you are marking yourself down the line, as well as the question of reskilling that you touched on, Ms Green. The threat of sanctions, again, this is another issue that has come up, the issue of the threat of sanctions. So we're often told sanctions aren't really being applied at such a high level, though of course the figures show that it's increasing significantly. But the fact of the threat of sanctions and how that damages engagement with casework and proper supported engagement, and more importantly as well as damaging the individual's employment prospects and the threat of sanctions, I thought it was very interesting, again, two complementaries, the question of decision and implementation, the fact that there seems to be a lack of questioning of the implementation of a recommendation for potential sanction that comes from Thuras Nua or CTAC, and I know that that was elaborated on by Mr Rudd and Mr Fagan as well. The question of, maybe you might just talk a little bit more about that, the fact that what does seem to be the pattern of the process, because I know we would be told, certainly we have been told, they don't issue sanctions, there's no role in sanctioning, but it still seemed to be that they direct the sanctioning things. So we might elaborate on that. But also the question of, what I thought was striking was the question of, you talked about the damage to overall social cohesion, Mr Griffin and Mr Boland, and Ms Green, you also spoke in a positive way, which is what we should be looking to, that when an individual is getting appropriate supports, it doesn't just benefit them, but it benefits the community. And I thought that that was the flip side of that vision. So, and I really would thank you in particular for your presentation, because I hadn't been aware of the extent of the work. And what it did, it showed to me where we could be in terms of supporting individuals. And again, the ancillary benefits to when you recognise people as humans, you actually support their family. Because I would imagine that the distress of being forced into inappropriate work or under threat of sanction means that rather than employment being a positive experience, for a wider family context, that it creates a kind of a ripple effect, and I know that that was mentioned by others as well. So I just really thank you for all that. And I had a last very technical question just from Ms Green. I was very interested in that you mentioned you work with all unemployed persons, and I'm wondering, an issue that we've also spoken about is qualified adults and those who are not on the live register, are those who may have part-time availability. And it's a huge issue we've come to before around persons who may only have part-time availability for employment. And we know that certainly Intrio hasn't really been able to accommodate that as much as it should, and it's certainly Job Path might. So again, if people might speak to that issue of those who just to finish, because I'm apologies that I have to, but if others might speak to, a number of people mentioned the question of care responsibilities. Now in some cases that might be about part-time availability, but I imagine in other cases it's simply a matter that somebody might not be available to do shift work, for example, that somebody might need a predictable schedule, for example. If you could just talk a little bit around that issue of family responsibilities, and again, in some cases that maybe the people are available for 40 hours, but that they're not available they need predictability, for example. So perhaps those issues might just be touched on. And I was very interested, lastly, Mr. Rudd and Mr. Fagan, you mentioned around that question of the power of attorney issue. I'll certainly investigate that further in relation to the PPP. I've previously submitted amendments unsuccessfully to the Social Welfare Bill in respect of those personal progression plans. I have concerns on them, but that's a different new concern, so I will look to follow that up. Thank you.
Senator Higgins, are you leaving now?
I will, but I will be reviewing the answers, and I certainly may follow up further with fellow members, with the representatives. So apologies that I have to review it in text.
Thank you, Senator Higgins. To the witnesses, if you hold your comments, I'll take the other members, and then you can respond to them. I wasn't sure if Senator Higgins was staying or going. Deputy Brady.
Thanks, Cahill. And firstly, just to welcome all the witnesses in, I think very, very powerful presentations, and it's always interesting to get an outside view through a different lens, because certainly I've looked at this comprehensively over the last number of years, and I've heard all of the stories which unfortunately have been dismissed by two ministers now, the Taoiseach, who was in the position of Minister for Social Protection, and obviously the current Minister. And I think, there's an interesting line here which came from the guys here, based on their interviews with the participants. And it says, many identified this service, i.e. JobPat, as the state deliberately attempting to lower people's expectations, or their expectations of work. And of course, when we had the now Taoiseach, the then Minister for Social Protection, in before this committee previously, he let the mask slip when questioned on JobPat. He said people need to give up their idea of a dream job. And we're talking about people with qualifications. We're talking about teachers who are engaged in part-time employment because of the nature of contracts, doing sub-work and that sort of thing. So, so that's the ideology that's driving all of that. And that's coming through from people participating, but also Minister also. Now, there was an interesting I suppose, piece there from Ms Green, just in terms of one of the people that she had engaged with, the 62-year-old man who left school at the age of 10, unemployed for 20 years, engaged in the services that had been identified, not through the narrow employment only focused objective, but a skill set identified to suit him. And I thought it was interesting that JobPat were able to come and take that individual who was engaging in that, doing woodwork and computer and IT, all the other skills that had been identified that were needed to get him back into the workforce, and JobPat were able to come and take him out of that setting. And we know now he's one of the 15,000. I think that was the latest figure that I've been given, people who've been called back up to engage with the programme for the second time round. So just to ask the question as to whether that's a common occurrence, people engaged with the services that JobPat are coming, and how that actually comes about, because I think it's absolutely appalling. And the other question there, just in relation to people obviously being referred over to JobPat, and then being referred from JobPat back over to the Adult Guidance Service. So how that actually comes about, and it's interesting to hear your analysis, the duplication and all of that. So just to get some further comments on that. Now, we've heard evidence from other groups, and I've engaged with, for example, the local employment services, who do phenomenal work across the state, and they've given evidence that through communication with myself and others, that if they had been given additional resources, they would have been able to skill up, expand to take on the work of the privatised of the whole area through Thursnua and CTEC. And we know since the formation of JobPat, the numbers being referred over to the LES have gone down year on year as more people are going into the privatised setting. So have you figures? I don't expect you to have them now, Ms. Green, but do you have figures as to people who have been referred over to your services for the years of 2016, 2017 and 2018? And have you seen a depletion of numbers being referred over since the formation of JobPat? And I think the chair is going to allow questions first, and then for you to come back in. So, I suppose the service that's offered in the adult guidance. I mean, how does it differ when someone engages with yourself? We know what people have to do when they go to JobPat. They have to go, and the evidence that has been given by Mr. Rudd and others, they have to go at times that don't suit them at the best of times. But when someone is engaged with yourselves, I mean, are there regular meetings? Is it a weekly meeting? Obviously, we know there's no sanctions imposed on people. So, just can we get a bit of an insight as to what people do?
Just tell you that we're oh, sorry.
Let the questions finish and I'll come back, because there have been a variety of questions that will influence all. So we take all the questions first, and then I'll give everybody an opportunity to respond to what's relevant to them. Yep. Will you conclude briefly?
Just a couple more points. We know the contract for JobPat, Thursnew and CTEC is due to expire this year, and I've been calling for it to be cut right now, and that needs to happen. What would you like to see happen in the here and now if the government, the minister, isn't prepared to curtail that contract? At the end of it, do you think the Adult Guidance Service would be in a position to meet that demand at that point? Just a couple of questions to a couple of the other witnesses, and I ask for your indulgence here, Chair, because it is a very important area. I was taken by the evidence that was given by both witnesses. Just a quick question to Mr. Rudd, because he gave a figure there in relation to signing the PPPs of 557.70, and obviously the total amount now. The evidence that was given at the Public Accounts Committee prior to Christmas, where for the first time we got the actual costs and the expenditure, that gave a figure of €311 for every signature, and it went through then the different sustainment payments for 13, 26 weeks, 39 weeks and 52 weeks, €613, €737, €892, €1,165. Someone is in sustained employment for 52 weeks or more. So just can I ask where you got that figure of €557.70 for the signing of the PPs, because that contradicts the evidence that we have been given of 311. And just a couple of concluding questions to the guys. And again, very, very powerful information contained in the statement. And certainly I've done a comprehensive analysis, where people could come and give their evidence to me. And like your engagement with the 25 witnesses, I got no positive feedback in relation to JobPat. But the one thing that did strike me was the individual that essentially had his identity, curtailed, attempted to hide it, and I'm talking about the traveller man who was forced, against his will, to have his name changed, to get a job. He would not agree to it, and that change was made on his CV. I find that absolutely appalling, particularly when this House passed a momentous bill last year which gave recognition to travellers and their ethnicity, and I find that absolutely appalling. And it feeds into, I remember reading a book by Paul Pierce many years ago called The Murder Machine, and it was about the education system, where everyone was channelled to be the same, coming through this conveyor belt. And that's what we're seeing here now in terms of labour activation, that everyone has to be, this product, conform, identities, done away with, solely to get into this low-pay, precarious employment.
Deputy Brady,
and that is what is at the essence of all of this. So can I just ask, you have done a comprehensive piece of work, and I think it would be very worthwhile for this committee if that work could be given over, if you were prepared to do that for further analysis by this committee, because I think it's a powerful piece of work. And just a final question
very briefly,
to the guys, as to whether the findings or that report have been given over to the Minister, because the Minister is in complete denial. She still stands over this fallacy that Job Pat is the most successful labour activation scheme in the history of the state, and she fails to take into consideration the thousands of people who have been bullied, intimidated, cajoled, identities robbed, stolen, suppressed, to get into this low-pay precarious employment. So, as to whether that report has been furnished to the Department.
Deputy Brady, if I have an opportunity, I'll come back to you, but I want to be fair to give the witnesses a chance to respond, and I have Deputy Smith who wants to contribute. Deputy Smith.
Okay, I have just a couple of additional questions, and just to say thank you. You're doing great work, and I would thank you on behalf of everybody out there who is victim of this vicious system. I don't know if any of you watched Daniel Blake was on the telly again over Christmas. It's my second or third time to see it, but this keeps coming back into your head, the outcomes of these vicious ways of trying to force people into employment, unsuitable employment, etc. But mostly it is vicious because of the level of employment now in 2019 is almost full, and they're crying out for workers. Why are the penalties increasing? So when I asked a PQ in October, the rate of sanctions from the time this system was introduced, it goes from 359 sanctions in 2011 to 55,828 in total over that whole period, 11,169 in 2018. Now, there's no explaining that except that it is punitive, and it is a way of trying to cut back on the appearance that the Social Protection Department are doing their job. In fact, what they're doing is they're paying out all this money to private companies, and I have a few questions for Mr Rudd on that issue, because again, as mentioned by Deputy Brady, the figure of 557.70 cents per signature, you quote that figure, and I accept that. I ask myself, how in the name of God do you reach a figure like that? How do they calculate it? 557.70 cents, not 558, or not 500, or not 600, or 550. How do they calculate it down to this exact 70 cents? And what the hell is going on there? And what is going on when the two companies are further subcontracting out, outsourcing their own work? Can you explain what you think is happening there? Is it that they can't cope with the volume of penalties that they're introducing, or the volume of people who are coming before them through intrio or through random selection? And then I also would like, if any of you can tell us if you've done any work on the rate of individuals who've been blocked from going back to education or into a CE scheme, because we get lots of people coming to us who, at the same time, almost simultaneously, within days or hours sometime, they're called into Job Path, and then they're told by a different department that you have the back to education allowance, or that there's a CE scheme there for you to participate in, and they're immediately blocked by Job Path from going into that back to education scheme or into community employment, which is a huge contradiction. In terms of what the government say they're trying to achieve, it's a contradiction. It's also very clear that a lot of the work that they're forcing people into is precarious work. And we just passed a bill here before Christmas to try and organise around precarious work, the Bandit Hours contract bill, that was to try and stop the spread of precarious work. And look what we're doing, forcing people into further and further precarious work. I too want to comment on the forced change of name by that was forced on that traveller man to hide his ethnicity. I came from a meeting with the Oireachtas Traveller Group the other day, where the Minister explained to us all of the different initiatives they're taking to bring about the recognition of ethnicity. And this again is another contradiction in government policy, that they try to force travellers to change their ethnicity while another department is spending a fortune, literally, on creating committees that's going to try and help them gain their ethnicity rights. Those are the main questions, just the blocking of individuals, how they reach the cost, the outsourcing, the precarious nature of it. And the very last question, it might be a long answer, but if it is, you might be able to give it to me expanded in writing. You say in your submission, Mr Rudd, that the reasons that one of the agendas of the department is to honour the IMF and EU agreement. Can you expand on that? What does the agreement actually say that the government have agreed to, the IMF and the EU? What does it actually say about forcing people into this kind of a contract through the state machine?
Thank you very much, Deputy Smith. Just before I go to the witnesses, I want to put things in context. You today, first of all, to thank you for the presentations and your attendance. And you today are part of a process. This is an issue that this committee has been investigating for a while, and we're coming towards the end of it. And it's important that, as a committee, we will produce a report. So the report will have findings and will have recommendations. And as Deputy Brady indicated, the current job path, as we know, the timeline is coming to an end. So the report is timely. In your comments, I'd ask you to avoid repetition and be as specific to the points that were raised. I suppose I would specifically ask you to be mindful that there are two elements of the report: the findings of job path as we know it, but we're equally concerned, and I think Mr Boland, you made a comment, your last line was, we'd recommend that you discontinue the policy immediately. You talked about what could have been, Ms Green. I suppose I would, as a committee, and whether you do it today or you would like to follow up in writing, because obviously time is limited, we are equally concerned about your vision of what you would see following the current phase, because as a committee we will be making recommendations for the future, and I think that's an important point to make. So while you've highlighted a lot of issues, and I'm not being dismissive of those issues, they will be part of the findings, but there's also a measure of what recommendations or what are your suggestions or proposals. The committee would be interested in that. Obviously, you're limited on time today, and if you want to submit in writing afterwards to the committee, we will consider those. Mr Rudd, I'll go down the line. I'd ask you to be direct, specific, avoid repetition, and mind the time. Mr Rudd, will you start with the money? A few of them have asked you about the 557.
In the 2013 Job Path Tender document, which is available online and anybody can read it, it states that the companies are getting 15% of the total price of the price that's on everybody's heads. As this committee has discovered yourselves, the total price is €3,718. 15% of that is the 550 figure. Exactly. It's simple mathematics. Check the 2013 Job Path Tender document. 15% is quoted in it for the bonus, for the signatures. Maths is simple. That's what boils down to that.
That were raised, Mr Rudd?
There was a number of questions raised, and I want to address a good few of them, if that's okay. I'll make it as quickly as possible. Yeah. As regards rolling sanctions, this has been going on for some time, and in one of the submissions that I've provided in the victim statements and in the United report, I mentioned the case of Jerry Tobin. I've just full permission to talk about him. He was sanctioned from March last year up till December the 22nd. There was rolling sanctions non-stop. Now, under the Social Welfare 2005 and 2010 Social Welfare Act, after 9 weeks, a client or anybody that has been sanctioned, even outside Job Path, is supposed to go back on the social welfare for at least 1 week before another 9-week round of sanctions is supposed to kick in. This didn't happen in his case, but he's only an example case. It happened in many cases. He was sanctioned straight through from March till December the 22nd, and even then he still hasn't got his money back at all, and they promised him he might give some of it. Now, he was actually sanctioned, and we have it in documentation and it's provided in the report. He was given a letter stating he's been sanctioned because he didn't provide sign a PPP. Now, it's on record. It's on record on the 8th of March where the Public Accounts Committee, Mr John Curran, Assistant Secretary of the Department of Social Protection, stating on record that people do not have to sign the PPP. It's the legal right to retain the right not to sign a private contract. Yet he was punished for trying to retain his legal right not to sign a private contract. Now, we have many examples of that. I've submitted one document here today which has 101 victim statements. And in another document there's more victim statements. This is a constant ongoing thing. There is rolling sanctions going on, and it's actually illegal because it's not covered in the Social Welfare Acts. They admitted it themselves in the Dublin High Court. In Damien Fagan's case, they stated that they don't even have the legal legislation in place to apply these sanctions when somebody declines to sign a PPP but still is willing to engage in the Job Path programme. And in the case of Jerry Tobin, he was fully willing to engage. They gave it to him in a letter form that he didn't sign the PPP, so he should be punished. But he later copped on that actually they did this wrong and illegally, so they then changed the excuse for him being sanctioned to, oh, he didn't attend. He has proof that he attended every meeting. His video proof, the visitor sign-in book. He has statements there from people that actually attended along with him. He can completely prove he attended every meeting, but yet they tried to switch the excuse just to keep the rolling sanctions going. And putting it bluntly, we went through hell just to try and clear his name. And the Department of Social Protection still is only partly willing to give part of the money that is returning from. That's just one issue. I'm going to move on quickly on to the others. The subject of dream job was brought up. Under the Constitution, you're guaranteed a great deal of right to self-determination. How can this completely conflicts with Leo Varadkar's view of a person is entitled to aim for their dream job? That completely shuts down everybody's ambitions to even go for it. When, there's a conflict there, and that needs to be addressed, and I'm very glad that Mr John Brady actually brought that up, because from the people that we've talked to, and again I've said in my opening statement that we've cried along with, it is a big thing. It completely, from the start, from day one of Job Path, it completely strips stuff of any ambition. You're just told, do this, do that, or else you're sanctioned. Third thing, other agencies. The mention of other agencies were addressed. This gracious lady over here has indicated already, their agencies and others like it should be adopted more. They should have been adopted from the very start. The services that they have there should have been more utilised. The state could have saved between 60 and 70% of money that has been put into Job Path programme by upgrading or using the services such as this lady. This is on record. On the 8th of May, you had people in the Public Accounts Committee from such services stating this themselves. They have been starved of numbers going to road programmes. In one of the victim statements that I have there, it's from an LES worker. Because the numbers dropped down, and I'll explain why they've dropped down in a minute, because the numbers dropped down, he then found himself in the LES out of work. Then he was sucked into Job Path and told to take a minor job. This is a state civil service worker. Why have the numbers dropped down? You brought up the numbers. The numbers have dropped down, but the sanctions are increasing. The numbers of unemployed are dropping down. Now, we can argue over percentages, but they are dropping down. That means that the group of people available to be sucked into Job Path is getting smaller. The companies are getting more desperate. The tactics that are used are the staff at basic level in the Job Path system have a very high, but there is a very high staff turnover because they are pressurised to get those people by any way possible to get those signatures. And so, I mean, there's a serious amount of pressure on the staff, the lower staff, and a serious amount of pressure on the people to sign. And it's just an ongoing issue that needs to, on its own, needs to be addressed.
Well, how does it explain if companies are getting desperate, why they're outsourcing to other companies?
Well, to be quite honest with you, Damien, I think, would like to speak on that.
Yeah, okay. When the companies were hired, they actually bid the price in with their claim. The tenure document is only half a contract. The other half of the contract is exactly what the two companies have actually charged the state. We don't know what they have actually agreed to. We only know what the state has offered them. This argument has been brought out in the Public Accounts Committee when the committees have actually tried to review the contract to see if actually what is meant to be spent on this programme. You're hitting a wall of private confidentiality or sensitivity. Within the makeup of the programme, in the tenure programme, it allows the companies to charge and subcontract out. But they don't have to notify public accounts or anyone that they're subcontracting the companies out. The companies decide themselves they want to subcontract out. One of the major issues I find about subcontracting is the subcontracting out to themselves. If you look at Thirst Newit, they subcontract, it's a joint venture of Working Links and RTF recruitment, FRT recruitment. They're a joint venture, but yet they subcontract back to themselves, working links. They're a part of the main group that originally got awarded the contract, but yet they subcontract it back to themselves. The reason I can't be 100% sure why they keep subcontracting out, but what it seems to be is that they've bidded for the bill at a certain price, knowing that they can pass it out to someone else at a reduced price. But at the end of the day, who's footing the bill is the taxpayer. We pay the highest price that was offered, and they pass it on to a lower price. That's the only logical explanation is that they're charging more than what it's actually cost to run the programme.
Thank you. Were there any other further points, Mr. Rudd?
Just to finish off, the name change and blocked education. The name change Mr. Brady referred to, this is an ongoing issue as well. Not just a name change, we have highly skilled people. We have part-time nurses, part-time firemen, part-time tradesmen out there with very highly skilled and wanted to go further. And I'll come back to their education on that in a minute. But they've been asked to actually consistently dumb down even their CVs. In other words, to have to lower their expectations for unemployment, which is, to a certain extent is right, let's be honest, we should be all out there working. But to actually tell a person that has a mountain of qualifications that you must dumb down your CV and take a basic wage job, I mean, that not only affects them at a financial level, it affects them at an emotional level, but that also affects their family also. Why is Daddy, with all his qualifications, stacking shelves in the supermarket? You know, what did he do to deserve that? Why is Mammy cleaning, and putting it bluntly, why is Mammy cleaning toilets when she's qualifications in marketing or design or whatever? I mean, how do you explain that to your children? How do you explain that the government is fair when this is actually happening? That's what it boils down to in real life. Now, as regards education, that was brought up. Job Path, we have found consistently by our own, and you'll find this in the victim statements, the Job Path companies will allow people out to a certain extent to get education. But the government, because of the hype or the madness over people speaking out about the current system, Job Path blocking education, the government announced that, we'll now allow people to go into education while they're in the Job Path programme. What they didn't state the full version, which is that, you'll be allowed to go into education if you want, some education, limited education, but on top of that, you also have to get the permission of the Job Path companies. Now, I mentioned the case of a part-time nurse. She wanted to go into upskill herself, and it was a year-long course. And she wasn't allowed to do that. The Job Path company said, no, the most you're going to be allowed to do is 4 to 9 weeks of any sort of training. And anything after that, we're not allowing you to do. They want to hold on to them because each one is trapped within a 12-year contract. Oh, sorry, apologise, a 12-month contract. So if they want to upskill at a serious level, third level, that takes up either part-time or full-time, 12 months, that contract runs out. And then they can escape out of Job Path. So, I mean, if they escape out of Job Path, the contract, if they get a job after that, the companies then aren't able to claim their additional payments. So they want to keep the people down to a minimum level of time education-wise. This, again, is a regular common problem. And many people have come to us. Up to 2 days ago, I'm still getting phone calls about this. Many people have come to us and said, I want to do this. I want to engage within the Job Path programme. But these people won't let me upskill in the ways that I want to, and it will benefit not just me, but it will benefit my family.
Thank you, Mr. Rudd. Mr. Fagan, before I move on, was there any further points you wanted to make?
I do, yes.
Please,
respond to questions.
Briefly.
Okay, I'm going to respond to 3 of them in one go. The ideology, the IMF, and what I would like to see in the programme. Okay. You asked about the IMF agreement. I did submit this to you in writing. It was outlined in its action. The IMF agreement was signed on the 28th of November 2010 and the 8th of December 2010 with the EU and the IMF. Under that agreement, integration of instruments to better identify job seekers' needs, profiling and increase engagement. More effective monitoring of job seekers' activities with regular evidence-based reports. Application of sanction mechanisms for beneficiaries not complying with job search conditionality and recommendations for partaking in the labour market programmes in such a way as to be perceived to apply an effective loss of income without being perceived as extensively penalised, and so it can be credibly used whenever a lack of compliance is asserted. They're the IMF agreements from the bank bailout. That's under social welfare structural reform. It's outlined in. I have provided that thing. It was on page 21. Now, how does this actually relate?
Can I interrupt you for one moment to be helpful to the committee? Those documents arrived late last night and have not been circulated yet, but will be. They came after the close of business, and the committee meeting was first thing this morning. So you will get the documents. So you can just take it. They have the documents.
So how does the IMF mix in with the Job Path programme? Well, actually, that was the Secretary General's own admission. The last time he was here on the 8th of March, he stated that the Job Path programme is in line with the, which is actually this bubble, support and services for unemployment, job seekers, challenges and opportunities in time of recession in 2011. In that there, it outlined on page 14, on the third paragraph, under point 3, ethics, that we have to note that anything we discuss from now on the creation of a system to deal with long-term unemployment in recession time always has to meet by the IMF agreement terms. So regardless of what we discuss, it still has to abide by these 3 conditions. These conditions is to profile, monitor and sanction when someone doesn't comply with the regulations. So how is the IMF involved, and how it's because it's actually all linked. The paperwork actually links it all back together. You asked me what I would like to see about the Job Path programme. And unfortunately, even if you shut the programme down today, there's nothing you can do. As long as these contract terms are in place, a new programme is just going to be set up to run the exact same way. So, asking what I would love to see a proper activation method programme that is designed to help people back into employment, education, stuff like that. That's specifically designed for the user. But we can't, because the IMF says that we have to have these rules in place, which then there's a company that uses this as a business practice to benefit from. So, regardless if we shut the programme down today, or tomorrow, or in 2 years' time, until that money is paid back to the IMF and EU, this is going to happen every programme that you create. And this is just one term and condition that's been applied now on the people of what's in the system. There's other areas of the IMF agreement that do apply today, but this is specifically social welfare. So you ask them why, there's nothing we can do. There's nothing I would love to see being able to walk down to my local employment office and go, look, I would like to find a job today, what can you do and help me? But you can't. It's all on the benefit of the company, the say of the company, and it's only if the company is. I'll respond to the number of sanctions, referral of sanctions, specifically on the ground. It is true that the department do make the sanctions. Yes, they are the ones who physically hit the stamp on the seal and say you've been sanctioned. It actually comes directly from the 2 companies themselves. In their tender document under sanctions, it is outlined in detail. Depending on what email you send, depending on what you write, depends on what level of sanction and how long it will be applied for, will be sent to the end, is what happens. Once the department gets that email, it's an automatic sanction. No ifs, ands or buts. This has been proven in my case when I was in the High Courts, and I've dealt with probably over 60 or 70 cases, all for the exact same issue. And one of the worst things about it is that you'll never see what that email ever says. That's hidden from you at all times. When you go to the appeals office, the companies don't have to come. They're the ones making the claims against you, but you don't have any evidence of the claim, just the department saying you have failed to engage because we've received reports that you have failed to engage. So that's why there's so many certain things, because once the company says it, that's it. You're sanctioned. The department takes it on face value. The Oireachtas research report from 2015, the same month that the programme came live, warned about this, that the belief over the companies is going to outweigh the belief of the people. This was warned well in advance before the programme was even created, but yet no one paid attention to it. There's no oversight, there is no governance, and there's not even proper records because of private and confidential arguments. I'll respond quickly about the contract. In the tender document, the PPP is defined as a plan to help people back into employment. And that's fine. Most of the PPP, I do even have my own one that was submitted in court and all are here with me today. Most of it is fine. It's meant to outline my skills, my grounds and all like that. It's the last 2 pages of the PPP is where the problem really comes in. That's where it turns the PPP from a plan to get back into employment into a contract. It states very clearly 3 to 4 specific terms. If you don't agree with us, we'll sanction you. If you don't provide us our information, we'll prosecute you. Now, I never know when private companies can actually prosecute someone for not sharing personal information, but according to the agreement that you do sign with Thuras Nua, you can be prosecuted if you don't share your information with them. The state will argue that this is not a contract. The state has argued in court it was a contract. I have tons of records and audio recordings from people who's been in meetings, all have the same thing saying, you signed the contract or you will be sanctioned. But sanctions the contract term didn't come from me or any of the record. It actually came from the department themselves. One of the things that most people don't realise is that I do check the records out. And there is 2 specific dates on when the state actually done joint information sessions on the Job Path programme. I outlined them in my timeline. The first one was on the 26th of July 2013, where 2 information sessions were held by the Department of Social Protection. I did provide the list of everyone who's attended that meeting to the committee today. The second one was on the 7th of November 2013. A joint information session was held by Social Protection and Enterprise Ireland. I've also provided that presentation to you. In that presentation, under Enterprise Ireland's presentation, it clearly defines that you're to the companies that you're to contract them in 2 separate ways. So it's the department that defined this as a contract. But only unfortunately because I'm more well aware that if I agree to what the contract says, my rights are gone. I no longer have a choice. People don't get to choose what careers they get to go into or what education they have. Someone else chooses it for their profit. So basically, the people have to work for someone else's profit and no benefit to themselves.
Mr. Fagan.
Yeah, that's for now, yeah.
Ms. Green.
Yes, thank you.
I hope I can... the issues that relate to
I hope I can remember now, but I think, John, one of the things that you were interested in is what happened to people who came to me who were then, that we would be working with and then were taken off. We had so many of those. It was tragic. People will know the adult education system will know that we have some wonderful programmes, both full-time and part-time. So somebody who's unemployed for over 6 months, our voluntary training opportunity scheme gives you 2 years full-time education to rebuild up to a level 5 skill or sometimes a level 6 depending on your ability. That's a fantastic opportunity. And then we have part-time programmes which would suit other people who may be looking to engage back in work and also upskill. So we had, I couldn't tell you the number now and I don't have that properly, but I could get it from our database. But there were huge numbers who were taken off programme. And we had a phrase in work, and it's well known, we were trying to, and the intro case officers themselves were trying to help us stop somebody, be Thuras Nua, as we would call it, so that we could get them in time to get them on a programme. But sometimes, somebody like the client I mentioned, I wanted him to go on a full-time programme, that very programme. But he had such a bad experience of education. He had so low skills. He hadn't got the confidence, and it was hard enough to get him to agree to my part-time programme, which was perfect for him, with the mix of practical skills and doing basic IT and improving his communications. Had he taken the full-time programme, he could not have. What happened to him could not have happened. He wouldn't have been Thuras Nua. But he didn't understand. People don't understand this. They're so honest. People were coming in this situation to you, were unemployed, being made unemployed, vulnerable. They could have been... I want to just address the question that Bridge asked as well around, because we work with people who are on sickness benefits and people are out sick for a very long time. And that is... Some of my clients have been actually people who have worked in those services and have been so, run down by it that they have been actually out sick themselves. And so we work with a lot of people who aren't on payments as well, you know what I mean, to restore them back into employment through education. But to go back to the people who have been, as I said, Thuras Nua, there would be, in particularly 2015, 2016, a huge amount. We notice quite a change this year in what is happening is that, and this frightens us even more, because the idea that the client that I've mentioned there, he wasn't brought back to me, he was brought back to Thuras Nua yet again. And now all he has to do, as he says, is go for a chat. But every time he signs in, that's terribly important for these companies to get their money. And he's not been asked to do anything. And he's such a shy man and he's so afraid that suits him. I just have to go out to the town once a month and go down there. So what a ridiculous waste yet again of his opportunity to have an opportunity to have a quality of life at his age, at 63 now, at 64 now, that he's going on to be. So we have several people who are working with Thuras Nua. They then will not engage with them. I had one young man who I had arranged, and I'm really upset about this, and I've looked for this young gentleman, an educational assessment. Anyway, he was with Thuras Nua. He didn't engage with them. The person in Thuras Nua has been quite good, has looked to try and get him back. So he hasn't turned up there. What has happened is he's been sanctioned. So he, I would say, is self-medicating, because I had a concern that he was doing that already for what he considers depression and for other issues. And he's off our books. He's off everybody's books. He's lost to society. And that we have that over and over again as well. So I tell you, it is a tragedy. If I can come to then the wider question that you asked, I think there's work for the local employment service, who are doing a very good job, and we were working very closely with them, with our partners in the intro service, with whom we have no difficulty. And honestly, I think they can't speak out themselves. We're all public servants in that way. I'm here as the chair of the Adult Guidance Association, but I know that they're not a fan of what is happening to the clients, that the DSP intro case officers even want them. They know they need the opportunity for education and training if they're going to get jobs, and they would like to help them do that, and they can't. So I would hope that this programme will not continue for another 2 years. You asked, in general, to look at the vision of what we see, and I think I raised that. First of all, I would like to quote a colleague of yours, Thomas Byrne, who we met recently, and he told me he was reading a book called De-Skilling America, De-Skilling Populations. And this project is a de-skilling. You have a contradiction of the government's policy, where you have the National Skills Strategy, which is the central strategy for the Department of Education, Enterprise and Innovation, all those bodies, IBAC, everybody is on board with that strategy. The recent bulletin came out. And then you have a project that is actually taking people out of, I have it here, the National Skills Strategy, to upskill to the highest level possible. And Brian McCraw of DCU University is very good on artificial intelligence. And Mr Varadkar was talking about the impact of artificial intelligence on jobs very, very recently in the paper. I think it was last Sunday's Times. And yet, and it is known, therefore, that we have to be so upskilled. And Brian McCraw would say from DCU that it's the highly transferable skills that we need, the customer service skills, the actually emotional intelligence, and to have it requires an awful lot of confidence in a person to use it. And you learn that by being rebuilt up, by building up your confidence and your educational and your qualifications, which then gives you those transferable skills that you can use everywhere. And he also said, so emotional intelligence and empathy, these were the qualities, as Brian McCraw was saying, in the new world order for the new jobs that we don't even know exist. And yet this project is taking people and keeping them in very low-skilled jobs. One other example I will give you of another woman who stayed the year. She wanted to come off the programme. She hated the job she was in. She was ringing me from the toilet in a local first start-up place. She stayed the year because if she couldn't be made redundant, she would lose her rights and entitlements and she wouldn't be able to pay her rent. And she was a wonderful person with some challenges that was doing this all on her own. She stayed in the job. She was made redundant the day she left. She was not... the idea was that she wasn't kept on in that job. So she had a year when I was about to get her with her degree onto a childcare programme. So these are the tragedies. The vision is that we want joined up thinking. I've mentioned in the statement that there is a fragmented approach. That has been stated. We have we are educated to a high level by this country to deliver a very good service. We have the intro protocol. We have the protocol, the national protocol with the Department of Social Welfare that was awarded to us. And yet this project completely ignored it. So I'm asking for you to push for the review of guidance, which was due out last September, has been delayed, and that will deliver the further education guidance strategy across all services. And there is work. If there's somebody in Thuras Nua who is highly skilled who wants to come and join our service or the local employment service, I think there should be an amalgamation of these and a properly run, integrated further education, training and guidance service for the country, for what is going to happen. We're in an very up times at the moment. But we know, you've lived long enough, I've lived long enough to know that I've been from the 70s to the 80s to the 90s, I've been through every recession, and I've been affected myself in my career, but I had some career resilience by having good educational skills which I could then work on. And I have gone up and down and across the learning axis. I have done a level 5 in childcare myself. My husband, who was a solicitor, lost his business in the crash, in the recession, and I'm so proud of him. He had to pay because he was self-employed. You've changed that rule now. I mean, that's one little thing that has happened. But he became a carer and has had the most satisfying period in his life until he's become recently ill. But that is what is happening. We need to be able to go up and down and across the axis of learning. You can't be shoving people in this progression route either. And I believe that that vision is possible. We have everything, and we have the people here in Ireland to deliver it, and we have the clients out there who desperately need the support and the opportunities that we can create.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms Green. Doctors Griffin and Boland to conclude, in whichever order.
I might start. I'll take the issues in reverse. What would we do? I suppose the Department of Social Protection is just over 70 years old this year. And more than any department, it has held us together as a society, often through very, very tough times. And we have enormous respect for that department. The forming of that department, particularly, but also its considerable achievements over its life in improving poverty and building social cohesion, are a very substantial political achievement that each generation needs to be renewed against strong opposition, and that's an achievement made in Leinster House. We have a world-class system of social protection in many ways. Okay? It's the envy of many other countries, up until recently, when we started photocopying failing models' homework and replicating them unsympathetically here. We need to get back to a human capital-centric approach. That is the approach that brought us to full employment. Like, when we were at international conferences, we're one of the few countries in which we were kind of reporting from that experiences full employment from time to time. We have proved that Irish people are not work shy. We got our long-term unemployment rates down to negligible levels. And so that demonstrates, that shows that the ideology of people are work shy and we need to work people over is not the problem. The problems of our labour market are the problems of our economy, and they're about industrial policy and the creation of jobs. So that's my kind of optimistic, what we need to do is get back to our core values in this area, and the core values held by most of the people working in the system that we have encountered in our research. Just to deal with the IMF EU issue, Dr. Rod Hick in the University of Cardiff's research suggests that the policy choices made here are Irish policy choices. Now, they are encoded in the deal we cut, but it is a contract, it's a deal, and it was on the Irish side that the aspiration for this form of activation came. It was not mandated. And we have a policy choice again, especially as we crest back into an era of near full employment. So, what else we should do is the core target of job path, worklessness, long-term worklessness, is usually and more efficiently improved by a community-based response that focuses on particular communities that experience unemployment and particular drivers of their unemployment and geographic black spots. And they are long-term developmental with community activities. There's a principle of community development which is nothing for us without us. The Jobs Path scheme is being done to people. It's not done with people. In our research, we've encountered all our unemployed people that we talked to, like all 121, attempt to navigate their way out of unemployment, and they are looking for help. They exist in their own personal labour market, not the broad labour market. They have specific geographic restrictions, educational restrictions, aspirations that they're trying to fulfil through the labour market. And supporting them in a really meaningful, human capital-centric way is what we need to do. So Tom is going to talk more about the kind of deadweight effect that is going to the Jobs Path has by not being a black spot or a community-led project. but a kind of blunt instrument that cuts across an entire population of people who broadly don't need that kind of activity. Just to pick up on another thing that was said, it's our sense, and this has been relayed to us by a lot of insiders within the department, professionals within the department at street level, at the offices and more at the policy level, is that most of what, or not most, but a lot of what's being done in this would not survive judicial scrutiny. And this relies on the practical reality that unemployed people don't have access to our courts. Specifically, sanctioning is against the principle of natural justice. The sanctioners are judge, jury and executionary. There's no sense of proportionality. The natural justice cycle of clear, unambiguous notice, formal warning, representation, advocacy and appeal are not intact, and the level of oversight is a disgrace in this, and the level of transparency. Little bits of information are figured out through PQs, and it leaks out. And if they were proud of this system, it should be open to scrutiny, it should be reporting. And we know this by our county-by-county data, that it doesn't appear they work to a consistent standard. There's no standard of work in which you can say what really delivers this is the high level of appeals that are successful. That if they work to a consistent standard, there wouldn't be that level of successful appealing going on. Okay, to deal with other issues. Another concern we have is that the case officers working within JobPath are not appropriate individuals to work with the vulnerable population of people. Typically, they themselves are on short-term contracts because the JobPath contract is for only 4 years. Clearly, they can't be employed for a longer time frame. And they're paid on a poorly thought out, what's called a performance model, but in reality is more a look-based model. Essentially, if you're in a highly liquid labour market like Dublin, you've got a really good chance of placing people in any job. If you're in Mayo, Kerry, if you're in Wexford, forget about it. Typically, the kind of people that are case officers are business and marketing graduates, usually with an emphasis on sales experience. So while JobsPath has doubled the number of caseworkers, this is done without reference to their capability, character of contract situation. And we have a fear that all this opens the state up to liability downstream, because of the kind of things that are happening here. So just to kind of conclude, before I hand it over to Tom, our sense is that JobsPath doesn't work. It damages users at the point of use and long term. It damages everybody in the labour market. Because if you think the massaging of CVs, well, companies getting CVs no longer trust CVs because they have to then start validating that this isn't authentically written by the person who's applied for this job. You can't hoodwink employers through an office of the state. And our sense is that the use of outsourced providers here allows people who would have a public service ethos, or it takes them out of the loop and reduces the standard there. It is a very expensive upfront, and based on our concerns about judicial scrutiny, there may be downstream liabilities to JobsPath. So.
Thank you, Dr. Griffin. Dr. Boland, to conclude.
Thanks very much. And taking into account that there's so much been said already, I'll try to be very specific. This issue of the case of the traveller man who had his name changed was brought up by several deputies, so I wanted to reflect on that. That data is protected by the WIT Ethics Board, and we're not really in a position to share it in a straightforward way. We publish reports, books and so forth, which has anonymised data which deals with these things in brief. I think we've submitted several things to the Department of Social Protection and obviously to the Minister also. We will hopefully produce more in the future. It's important that confidentiality is respected in this case. Basically what happened, to fill in what happened, he was sitting down and he was attempting to cooperate, and then somebody said, right, this is your CV. They changed it online, more or less in front of him, and said, right, I'm going to submit this now. And they just sort of took over the whole thing for him. They just took over the driving seat. He had no agency whatsoever. They just did it to him as such, without his consent at all. Okay, so that's that. I want to pick up on, as Ray says, Job Path is not really a payment by performance, despite all this talk of payment by outcome. The real thing that's performing here is not job path providers, but the Irish economy. The Irish economy performs, people get better jobs. You can tell by what the quantitative data that even though there's an initial bounce, an initial bump of people making commencements of employment, 25%, which is higher than that which would be without job path, these are people that don't stay in employment for any longer time, and the negative effects of beating them into them, using the stick with the threat of sanctions, or sanctions, will have negative effects in the long term. The only thing that it can possibly do is act as a sort of an intimidating middleman that makes sure that people apply for whatever job's going. So it's not intervening in a natural market, but creating a market. It's what we call market coaxing. It forces people to enter the market and to apply for things below what makes sense economically or personally for them. So it's a huge problem in this regard. We've talked a great deal about what we want, and we come back to the fact that activation is an OECD-wide, EU-wide policy, activation of some sort. The Irish case, or the Irish system, was criticised for years, for decades, for being too passive, and this was, to an extent, a misunderstanding. To an extent, we were active in that we provided training and back to education supports, and the thing that was missing was this thing of conditionality. And as several people have suggested already, and replying to Senator Higgins, work first doesn't work. Human capital building and education and opportunities, training, whatever it is that people choose, does work. So the thing is, though, a system will be designed to follow up some form of activation, and the question is what form of activation. And it's very clear from what we've heard today that it needs to be professionally run, that it needs to be focused on training and so on and so forth. But one of the things that, when we begin to think realistically about these things, is even if they are properly legally administered and backed up and passed by the Oireachtas with proper oversight of the Attorney General, sanctions are a part, and were previously a part, of the welfare regime, except that they were sort of a nuclear option. If you did it, you took somebody's entitlement away entirely. So now we have these smaller sanctions that are being applied very much without responsibility, without due caution. So it's clearly, we need to look at how we do these sanctions. We're not going to remove them utterly, because then there's no stick whatsoever. We really need to look at how we do sanctions. They need to be clearly signposted. They need to be not for all situations. You need to have a difference between those things which are compulsory, maybe attendance at meetings, but everything else being optional as far as possible. Then you need something in regard to making them some sort of proportionality, leniency for first offences, or no first offences, a warning. In France, I believe that they have a 3 refusal system. I talked to people in Brittany, and their system appears to be you get to refuse 3 jobs first before you can even possibly be sanctioned, and they have to be looked over and are properly regulated to see that they are suitable jobs for these individuals. We can do this. We can photocopy better policy than the UK policy, I think. In doing this, in reorienting and changing the welfare system, and there will be a new system which will be trumpeted in some sort of way, it's got to undo a lot of the damage that's been done to the economy in terms of low-wage and precarious kind of work, but also restore people's faith that when you go in, you will be helped, you will be supported, you will not be subject to caprice, the rules will be explained, they will be clear, and that you will be given a chance, you will be given a generous interpretation. We need to renew the sense that this is a social safety net that you can rely on, and that builds cohesion and a better economy with decent work and an expectation that if you fall on hard times, there will be solidarity, and people will help you out, and the state will support you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Boland. Deputy Brady, we're going to conclude brief in a moment, so if you want to make a brief comment, please.
Just a few observations and questions stemming out of the answers there. I suppose a couple of things that struck me there, just in the concluding remarks, that obviously job path doesn't work. It damages users and it damages everyone in the workforce, and potentially downstream that there could be liabilities coming as a result of job path. And I think that is a very, it's a huge statement to make. It's something that I have said, that this is an investigation in the making, that we will be coming back to this, because I think the vast amounts of money and the issues, we know there's been High Court cases stemming out of it, and I think that is only the beginning of it. I just want to touch on the whole issue of sanctions. And it ties in with core values, and we need to get back to core values. But I think that the sanctions is, it's, you mentioned all the words oversight, accountability, all of those, absolutely. But the problem I have, and the problem that many people have, and you mentioned core values, is the perception that this is coming from sanctions are imposed by intro officers. And I know many fantastic people with real core values working within the intro offices, trying to stop people getting into tourist nude or whatever terminology we want to put on it. And we're opposed to this privatisation from the outset. It was imposed without their input, consultation, any of that. And I think this attempt, and it's there's a paragraph here from the guys that says, while officially sanctioning decisions are made only by the intro office, in practice, in the experience of job seekers, the recommendation of a sanction by a job path provider was a fait accompli. In research, we have spoken to counter staff and case officers and welfare officers. The job path providers are described as deciding on sanctions. And I think that is very, very important, because when the Minister has been questioned on this, she said it is the decision of the intro offices, and yet, all the evidence that I have and the evidence given here today is the decision is taken, and the guys outlined that as well, depending on the nature of the email that is sent. So I think that is important.
Thank you.
I think it was Jeff or Damien mentioned in terms of the contracts and this, the whole rolling sanctions. And you made reference to in the contract that they could only impose sanctions up to 9 weeks. Then the job seeker had to go back onto benefit or whatever. So if you could send that section over to us, just so we could see that. And just one further point here, look, with your indulgence. And Ms Green, in her initial contribution, she spoke about the PEX 1 and people 3 months unemployed, and being critical to get those back in, because they're more employable at this stage. And we know that when Job Path was rolled out, it was for, I'll just quote here, I can't find it. Oh, yeah. The purpose of Job Path is an approach to employment activation which caters mainly for people who are long-term unemployed over 12 months. And we know that was how it was initially rolled out. And they have completely deviated away from that. And I've encountered more and more people on a weekly, on a daily basis now, people who are short-term unemployed for days, for weeks, who have now been referred over to Job Path. And I think that is an admission that the system, the policy has failed. I also think that it is, because the nature of this contract and the monster that I've described as being Job Path, they have to continuously feed this monster that they have created. And, we're seeing more and more of that.
Thank you, Deputy.
So I think we need, if there is more evidence around that, it would be very, very useful for the committee, because the Minister, time and time again, has said it is only for long-term unemployed people, but we see more and more short-term unemployed people being fed into the Job Path. And this is again about the private model. It's not about the individual, because the people who are short-term unemployed being fed in, it's easier for them to gain employment, therefore feeding the private companies the bonuses that they accrue.
Deputy Brady, we need to conclude it there. If you have a response, you're going to have to submit it in writing. I just want to be clear with the witnesses. A number of issues were raised. Some of the points you made, Deputy Brady, they will be part of the consultative process that we do when we're doing the report. A number of the questions that might have been raised, if you have something to comment on, would you please send it in. The reason I say that is we have a voting block in the Dáil, so the meeting is due to conclude. Secondly, I suppose, more importantly, to the witnesses, this is the final set of witnesses for this module of work that we've done. On the conclusion of today's meeting, and I make this comment to all witnesses at all meetings, if there is something that you reflect on afterwards that you want to add to what you've said, would you please feel free to correspond with the committee. And the reason I say that is we will shortly start drafting a report based on the hearings. And as I say, you are the last group of witnesses there. On behalf of myself and the committee, Mr Rudd, Mr Fagan, Ms Green, Drs Griffin and Boland, thank you for your attendance today and the opening statements and supporting documentation. In your case, Mr Rudd and Mr Fagan, it only arrived last night and the committee members haven't. It will be circulated long in advance of drafting the report. I just want to make that point clear, but they didn't have the opportunity. Colleagues, that's where we'll conclude and adjourn today's meeting. We're adjourned until 10 a.m. on Thursday, the 31st of January. Thank you.